Today we are going to talk about Liu Chen, a young Japanese man who, at just 22 years old, nearly broke the bank at three of the biggest casinos in Las Vegas. Our story takes us back to the year 2002. The world was still recovering from the ashes of 9/11, and Las Vegas, Sin City, shone with an almost defiant intensity. Its neon lights were a beacon of excess and promises of fortune. In this oasis of opulence, three titans of granite and glass dominated the strip. The Bellagio, with its Italian elegance and famous dancing fountains, the MGM Grand, an emerald green colossus that roared with the energy of a lion, and Caesar's Palace, an empire of Roman fantasy where every night felt like the height of Rome. These were not simple hotels with casinos, they were fortresses. Their walls housed millions of dollars in cash, and their ceilings hid a labyrinth of catwalks and one-way mirrors. The eye in the sky, an army of CCTV cameras, watched every card, every chip, every blink. In windowless security rooms, teams of men with serious faces and stale coffee analyzed hours of video footage looking for any anomaly, any player deviating from the probability curve. In 2002, digital technology was just beginning to emerge, but surveillance still relied heavily on human instinct and experience. And their instincts told them they were invincible. But they didn't count on Liu Chen. Liu wasn't your typical tormented genius. He grew up in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Kyoto, a quiet and observant boy. His father was a humble watchmaker, a man who taught him the value of precision and patience. Liu didn't see numbers as mere digits. To him, they were the notes of a universal symphony. He saw patterns in chaos, the logic hidden behind chance. While other kids played soccer, Liu devoured books on probability theory and advanced calculus. To him, Blackjack wasn't a game of luck. It was an equation to be solved. At 22, Liu was a math student at the University of Tokyo. But his real studies took place in pachinko parlors and the underground gambling dens of the city. He didn't do it for the money, but for the thrill of cracking the code. When his father fell seriously ill, accumulating medical debt that threatened to destroy his family, Liu's equation changed. Gambling was no longer an intellectual challenge, it became a necessity. With his savings and a determination forged in the silence of libraries and the noise of gambling halls, he bought a one-way ticket to Las Vegas. He carried nothing but a backpack with some clothes, a couple of math books, and $2,000. His first target was the MGM Grand. It was the biggest, the loudest, the most chaotic, a perfect place to go unnoticed. In 2002, the MGM was a labyrinth of green velvet, psychedelic patterned carpets, and the constant chiming of thousands of slot machines. Liu, with his harmless student look, was invisible. He started at the $10 blackjack tables. He didn't want to attract attention. For 2 days, he played like just another tourist. He won a little, lost a little. But in his mind, a supercomputer was at work. He wasn't just counting cards with the high-low system, a technique already known to casinos. He was doing something much more complex. He was shuffle tracking. He memorized sequences of cards through the shuffle. Most casinos in 2002 used shuffling machines, but at the lower stakes tables, hand shuffling was still common. And dealers, efficient as they were, had their own rhythms, their own inertia. Liu identified clumps of high-value cards and predicted with astonishingly high probability when they would appear. On the third day, his attack began. He moved to a $100 table. The atmosphere here was different. Fewer tourists, more serious players. The dealer was a woman named Brenda, a veteran with a professional smile and eyes that missed nothing. Liu kept his base bet at $100. He played perfect basic strategy with no deviations. But when his mental count indicated the deck was hot, full of aces and tens, his bet spiked to $1,000. The first time he did it, the table went silent. Brenda arched an eyebrow. Liu was dealt an ace and a king. Blackjack. $1,500 in winnings. A few minutes later, another $2,000 bet. 2 queens. He stood. The dealer had a 6. She hit. A 10. She busted. Liu won another $2,000. In the surveillance room, an analyst named Frank, a burly man with a walrus mustache, leaned into his monitor. "We have a possible counter at table 215. His boss, named Henderson, an ex-Chicago cop with the patience of a high-voltage cable, walked over. They watched for 20 minutes. "His betting spread is too aggressive," Henderson said. "Send a floor supervisor." A man in a suit approached Liu's table. He stood behind Brenda, watching. It was an intimidation tactic. Liu didn't flinch. His face was a mask of serenity. He kept winning. Henderson ordered the next countermeasure. "Change the dealer, send Jimmy in, and have him shuffle halfway through the shoe." Brenda was replaced by a young man who shuffled the cards with almost violent speed. And after just 3 hands, he would collect the cards and shuffle again. This would frustrate a normal counter. But Liu wasn't normal. His shuffle tracking technique allowed him to adapt. Even with fewer cards played, he could identify his key sequences. Liu's stack of chips kept growing. Henderson cursed under his breath. "This kid is good. Too good." He ordered a cocktail to be brought to Liu's table. Expensive whiskey on the house. Another tactic: distract him, cloud his judgment. Liu accepted with a polite bow. He left the drink untouched on the table. After 4 hours, Liu's stack of chips exceeded $200,000. Henderson made a decision. "That's enough. Read him the riot act." The floor supervisor approached Liu's table. "Sir, your play is too good for us. We invite you to enjoy any of our other games, the slots, roulette, but your blackjack game is over. You may cash out your chips." It wasn't a request. Liu nodded, gathered his chips, and headed to the cage. The cash-out process was tense. For such large sums, identification and tax paperwork were required. Liu presented his Japanese passport. As the cashier counted the bundles of $100 bills, Liu felt the eyes of security on him. He knew his photo and name would go into a database shared among the casinos. He was no longer invisible. He left the MGM Grand with $212,450 in a duffel bag. His second target was the Bellagio. If the MGM was a roaring lion, the Bellagio was a panther, elegant and deadly. In 2002, its interior was a display of European opulence. High ceilings, Murano glass chandeliers, and the famous conservatory and botanical garden, a floral paradise in the middle of the desert. Here, the stakes were higher and the clientele more sophisticated. Security was less visible, but far more intense. Liu knew he couldn't use the same strategy. His face would already be in the system. So he changed his appearance. An expensive suit, designer glasses, and a different hairstyle. But his greatest disguise was his playing style. He headed to the Baccarat room, the game of high rollers. Baccarat is a game of pure luck, or so most believe. Liu had studied one of the most esoteric advantage play techniques, edge sorting. He realized that the pattern on the back of the cards of a specific brand used by the Bellagio was not perfectly symmetrical. The long edge on one side of the card had a slightly different pattern than the other. The difference was millimeters, invisible to the untrained eye. He spent a whole day at the Baccarat tables, betting small, simply observing. His goal was to find a dealer who, unknowingly, rotated the high-value cards, 7, 8, and 9, 180 degrees before putting them in the shoe. It was a needle in the haystack, and he found it. An older dealer, about to retire, with an almost imperceptible habit. The next day, Liu sat at his table. He asked the floor supervisor, as many superstitious players do, if they could keep using the same deck of cards without changing it. In Baccarat, this is not a strange request. And then his performance began. When the dealer dealt, he could see, by the asymmetrical edge on the back of the cards, that the first card for the banker or player had a high probability of being a high-value card. This tiny piece of information tilted the casino's edge from just over 1% to more than 6% in his favor. It was an astronomical advantage. He bet heavy. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 per hand. And he won, again and again. The supervisors were baffled. Baccarat is a game of chance. No one can win that consistently. They reviewed the surveillance tapes. They saw nothing. He wasn't counting cards. He wasn't communicating with anyone. He just sat there, watched the cards, and bet. His behavior was impeccable. In the Bellagio security room, the security director, a woman named Eleanor, watched Liu with a mix of frustration and admiration. "She's doing something, but I don't know what it is," she told her team. "Review every frame. I want to know if he even blinks off beat." After 6 hours, Liu had accumulated more than $1.5 million. The casino was bleeding, and they didn't know why. The tension was palpable. Several men in suits surrounded the table. Liu knew his time was running out. In one last hand, he bet $300,000 on the banker. He won. He stood up calmly.
"Mr. Chen," said Eleanor, who had come down to the floor, "an impressive night. We'd like to invite you to a luxury suite and dinner at our Picasso restaurant, on the house." It was a polite offer with an undertone of steel. They wanted to keep him, study him, figure out his secret. "That's very kind of you," Leo replied with a slight bow, "but I have an early flight. Perhaps next time." The cash-out process was even more intense than at the MGM. He was given a cashier's check for most of the amount. While he waited, he was invited into a small, luxurious office. Eleanor was there. She offered him a drink. "We've never seen a streak like yours in Baccarat, Mr. Chen. You're either a legend or the luckiest man alive." "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity," Liu replied, quoting Seneca. He walked out of the Bellagio with $1.8 million and the certainty that he was no longer an advantage player, but public enemy number one in Las Vegas. His final target was the boldest of all, Caesar's Palace. If the MGM was brute force and the Bellagio was elegance, Caesar's was arrogance, an empire of marble and golden statues. In 2002, Caesar's was known for its relentless security and zero-tolerance policy. They knew Liu was coming. His name and face were on high alert across every casino on the Strip. Entering through the front door was impossible. But Liu didn't plan to enter through the front door. He had used part of his money to hire a team. Not criminals, but specialists. A Hollywood makeup artist who transformed him into a middle-aged Texan businessman with a subtle facial prosthetic and gray in his hair. A tech expert who provided him with a tiny earpiece and a micro laser the size of a grain of rice. Liu focused on roulette, the last bastion of pure chance. But Liu had read about a theory: sector prediction. Roulette wheels, no matter how well calibrated, had imperfections, slight tilts, flaws in the frets separating the numbers, and dealers, like those in Blackjack, had their own signatures. The speed and force with which they spun the ball were remarkably consistent. His plan was a masterpiece of physics and observation. He sat near the roulette wheel, not betting. In his shoe, a switch activated the micro laser, invisible to the human eye. The laser measured the speed of the ball and the roulette rotor in their first few rotations. These data were transmitted to Liu's partner, a physics professor in a van parked 2 blocks away, who fed the data into a computer. The computer calculated the most probable sector where the ball would land, a group of 6 to 8 numbers. The prediction was sent to Liu's earpiece, all in less than 5 seconds. The tension was unbearable. This was 2002. This was sci-fi technology for a casino. Liu began to bet, not on individual numbers, but on sectors. He covered groups of numbers with high-value bets, and he started hitting, not always, but frequently enough for his winnings to skyrocket. The security room at Caesar's was a hive of activity. "He's at roulette 4, shouted a guard. The head of security, an ex-Marine named The Hammer, ran to the monitors. "No one wins like that at roulette. No one. Zoom in. Check if he's wearing any device." The high-definition cameras of the time couldn't detect the tiny earpiece or the laser in his shoe. They saw a loud, lucky Texan celebrating every win with a "Yee-haw!" It was the perfect cover. But the Hammer was paranoid, and paranoia is a useful tool in his line of work. "Close that table. Say the wheel is unbalanced." The supervisors moved in. "Ladies and gentlemen, this table is closed for maintenance." The crowd protested. Liu took his chips without a word. He had already won nearly $2.5 million. He knew the game was over. But as he headed to the cage, the hammer and 4 of his biggest men blocked his path. "Sir, we'd like to ask you a few questions in our office." They took him to a windowless room in the bowels of the casino, the famous back room. There was no physical violence, but the intimidation was suffocating. "We know who you are, Chen," said the hammer, dropping a photo of Liu onto the metal table. "You've made a lot of noise in our town." Liu remained silent. He knew they had no proof. Edge sorting was legal, shuffle tracking was a mental skill, and the roulette device was gone. He had passed it to an accomplice, a woman posing as an excited tourist who accidentally bumped into him as he left the table. "Empty your pockets," ordered the hammer. Liu did. They found nothing. They were furious. Without proof of a cheating device, they could do nothing but ban him for life. They allowed him to cash out his chips, but left him with a clear message. "If we ever see you in any Las Vegas casino again, we won't be so polite." Liu Chen walked out of Caesar's palace at dawn. The desert sun was rising over the strip, illuminating its fantasy facade. In 3 weeks, a young math student with $2,000 had won over $4.5 million from 3 of the most powerful corporations in Las Vegas. He didn't do it with weapons or deceit. He did it with his mind. He saw casinos not as temples of chance, but as systems. And every system, no matter how complex, has its flaws, its patterns, its cracks.